Hi, everybody. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening, Rabbi Friedman, Rabbi Jacobson.
Thank you.
To everybody listening, my name is Friedman, and let me just set out the process of the evening. I'll be just saying a few introductory remarks. Then we're going to go into the themes of the evening: equality, race, destiny, and one last one that we've added, based on the Rebbe's words, of compassion without cause as a solution, a definition, if you like, of doing things lishma if we're going to get over the suspicion and the conflicts that we have. It's also very, just to point out, Rabbi Lewin was talking about his work in Quebec City, and this year Gimel Tammuz corresponds tonight to tomorrow with the national holiday in Quebec. And that's always a time when unity and coming together is a major theme of this society, which has had its own experiences with it. I'm honored to have been asked to moderate this very special dialogue. I want to thank Chabad Quebec and Rabbi Moshe and you in particular. And just a few words as I reflected on these themes of equality, race, and destiny and reviewed my own learning. I came to the conclusion that the way we have to do this evening tonight has to be from the Rebbe's own words. We have to examine these questions from his own almost revolutionary words. Yes, he was a preeminent Jewish religious leader, but at the same time, there have been very few leaders in history who have put forth a vision of social justice for all people with such passion and eloquence. I believe that had he chosen to place himself even more in the public arena, he would have had an effect of equal magnitude on the conscience of mankind as the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. did. And these are not my sentiments alone. These are the words of Congressman John Lewis of Georgia, who worked with Dr. King, who bled with Reverend King, and who was the co-sponsor of the Congressional Gold Medal awarded to the Rebbe. And perhaps the greatest duty we have on this 25th yahrzeit is to commit to disseminating the Rebbe's vision of the brotherhood of man to the widest possible corners of the world, and especially the non-Jewish world, in this era of crisis and challenge. And this duty of memory and witness is incumbent upon our generation. I want to tell the viewers that after we finish every section, you can text your questions, because what the organizers have decided on is we're going to do the Q&A between each section, and just text them to the number you see on the screen, 514-993-3429. Obviously, we have to keep within time frames, so if all your questions don't get asked, you can blame me. So the first section that we'll discuss, the first issue we'll discuss, is on equality. And almost from the outset, the Rebbe moved quickly through the 1950s in elevating the role of women, for example, in family life, in education, by encouraging and building institutions of higher learning for them, and even giving them a greater role in religious observance, such as carrying the Torah. The Rebbe wrote, years before the women's liberation movement, words whose eloquence and vision even Gloria Steinem might envy. After thousands of years of male dominance, he said, we now stand at the beginning of the feminine era, when women will rise to their true prominence and the entire world will recognize the harmony between man and woman. Given the Rebbe's role as a great innovator, particularly in stressing the importance of the role of women, as he built arguably the most extensive and effective global kiruv movement, religious or secular, that the post-war world has seen, how much work, rabbis, is still left to be done on the matter of gender equality? And let's start with Rabbi Friedman.
Okay, so first we have to recognize that gender matters, that there are genders and they're real and they're important. So gender equality does not mean weakening the gender. So we can try to improve equality by making the masculine less masculine and the feminine less feminine, until we become some kind of nondescript being. That's not what we want to do, and that is not respectful to either men or women. If we respect our gender, which we should, then we have to find ways of maximizing, not minimizing, what is truly feminine, what is truly masculine. And there's a crisis. We have a crisis in that area. The Rebbe celebrated God's creation. We're created male, then we have to be the best that the masculine gender can be. And if God creates us female, then we have to be the best in that. So equality means that we can all achieve our own perfection, not that we have to blend and become some kind of a mixture, a homogenized version of who we are. The Rebbe never suggested that women compete with men or step into the role of men. On the contrary, the role of women is indispensable. Man is not enough, as the Torah says, right? So in order for the world to be healthy and in order for the world to be right, men have to be good men and women have to be good women. Good at being women and good at being men. That's where the secret lies.
Rabbi Jacobson.
Yes, I think what Rabbi Friedman just said is so vital and important. We often, in the name of equality, allow people to actually compromise on their own power and contribution and not live up to their most innate, intrinsic potential. But I think in a more general way, the Rebbe obviously was a great student of Torah and of Judaism. In fact, probably one of the best ways to define the Rebbe was somebody who was absolutely and unequivocally a human being who was a servant of God 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and became a conduit, literally to fulfill Hashem's mission from Hashem's mission of him. And I think the Rebbe gazed into the story of Jewish history. And when you look at the book of Genesis, for example, you'll see a very interesting phenomenon. And that is all the big decisions are made by women. The small decisions are made by men. For example, who decided that Adam should eat from the tree of knowledge? That was a pretty cataclysmic decision. Would you disagree? It was Eve. And who decided that Ishmael should be expelled from Abraham's home? Pretty powerful historic decision. It was Sarah. And who decided that Jacob, rather than Esau, should receive the blessings? Powerful historical impact that had. It was Rebecca. And who decided that Jacob should marry the wrong woman? It was Rachel and Leah working together. Who decided that Judah should have a relationship with Tamar? It wasn't Judah, it was Tamar. And that begins the dynasty of King David and royalty and Mashiach. And who decides that little Moses should be retrieved from the Nile and saved? A woman, and not a Jewish woman, Batya. So I think the Rebbe saw clearly what Judaism always taught, and that is that those who believe that Judaism relegates to women some second class and secondary and subservient role really are losing the plot and not in tune to the major theme of Judaism and history. And that is that each of us has an indispensable role, and that women were given by God that unique wisdom, foresight, vision, resilience, and fortitude to be able to ensure that the most important things about God's world and God's children remains intact.
You want to hear something really cute? Really interesting. The previous Rebbe's father explained back in the 30s, the Rebbe explained, what does it mean, sheker hachein vehevel hayefi? That false is the charm and vain is the beauty. A woman who fears God should be praised. Listen to how the Rebbe explained this back in the 30s. The Rebbe said there will come a time when falseness will be charming and vanity will be beautiful. which means that charm and beauty will be hijacked into vanity and falseness. And a woman who is God-fearing will be mocked. Tishalo is from the word mocking.
Mm.
And it is the woman's, the Rebbe said this back in the 30s, it is the woman's job to reclaim beauty and reclaim charm and bring it back to holiness. Right? Very original translation of the Eichos Chayil.
Rabbis, I would love to hijack the conversation because I'd have a great time talking just to the two of you, but I'm not going to do it. What I am going to do, the texts are coming in, and just for the purposes of time, what I am going to do is combine the first two questions into one. One of them, actually, I was going to ask both of you yourselves. So let me combine this. The one question has nothing to do with the other. First, and this is something I wanted to ask both of you, yourself, and myself. Are we using the word equality too much in everything and affirmative action too much in everything? Should we not be talking more about equity? So I wanted to ask you, somebody did. The second question, the reason I'm combining with it is because we have so much discussion of equity and of equality among the sexes, except that today the discussion, as the texter wrote, has so much to do with people who don't identify with one gender or another. So do we have to take the discussion down a step from equality to equity, just so that we don't get a massive mediocrity because of affirmative action? And number two, how does this whole issue of gender apply, and what would the Rebbe's position be? What's the derech on those who don't have an identity, either as a man or a woman, and today are getting so much attention? Rabbi Jacobson, Rabbi Friedman, whichever one of you would like first.
My senior colleague.
Okay. Let's start with the equity question. Is our lashon, our words wrong? Is the word equality wrong?
Yes. The word equality is wrong not only for the genders, but in general. It seems like equality has replaced morality. Morality at its very minimum is the claim or the belief that the strong may not take advantage of the weak, the rich may not be given privileges in court over the poor, those who know may not use their knowledge to mislead others. In other words, morality is basically based on the assumption that people are not equal. And because of that inequality, people can take advantage of each other. Morality says you may not do that. So the poor can be taken advantage of by the rich, and they can get away with it. The weak can be abused by the strong, and they can get away with it. Morality says you cannot do that. God says you must behave morally because of your inequalities. Now, when we don't believe in morality, if you're convinced that people are not going to be good, then you need equality. It's like a substitute for morality. It's like everybody should have equal amount of wealth, and then nobody will steal because the other person doesn't have anything you don't have. That's not moral, that's amoral. Equality cannot be a substitute for morality. And I think that's what it is. We're hiding from the fear of immorality by trying to convince everybody that we're equal. The same is true also when you try to improve on godliness. If you try to improve on the 10 Commandments, you're always going to get into trouble. Lives matter. That is so dangerous. That does not enhance the commandment, thou shalt not murder, or thou shalt not steal. It doesn't enhance it, it weakens it. Life matters, that leaves it open to conversation and to negotiation. How much does it matter? To whom does it matter? It's weakening the position. There is no such thing as life matters. Life is sacred. There's no negotiation. There's no discussion. It's absolute. Life is sacred. That's God's view of life. And to reduce it to matters, it undermines our morality. So you're right. Equality is a poor substitute for morality, and it's not working.
Thank you, Rabbi. Rabbi Jacobson.
Yeah, I would just crystallize it perhaps in these words. The notion of equality, a word that became so popular today and is entrenched in our culture, is really a response to the pain of thousands of years of massacres, prejudice, bigotry, hatred, racism, genocide, slavery, etc., etc. So trying to create a world, a civilization that is more compassionate and more kind, we introduced this word equality. In that sense, we salute the fact that our world is coming closer and closer to a view and a perspective that we are all God's children, that God wants more than anything else that we should be kind to each other, compassionate to each other, loving to each other, that we're trying to bring our world to a place, to a time which we call Mashiach, when the consciousness will be one of harmony and of unity, and we will all recognize our innate oneness as manifestations of divine energy in our world. That tendency, that concern, that conviction that vibrates in the psyche of so many millions and billions of people today is extraordinary, a far cry from the culture of gladiators and absolute irreverence for human life, etc. However, there is an error in this. And the error, and I think Rabbi Manis pointed it out very wisely and accurately, and that is we don't help anybody by obliterating the concept of differences. Every person is unique. Every single human being has a contribution to make. I remember the Rebbe once said publicly at a gathering words, they were very powerful. He said, in order to avoid jealousy in the cosmos, there is not a single living organism or existence that is only a giver or exclusively a taker. Every living organism, from a worm to an ant, from a mosquito to a bat to a bee to an elephant, to planet Mars, to the black hole, to a banana, to every human being and chimpanzee and cat. And every existence is both a mashpia, a giver, and a makabel, a recipient. And he says that avoids, in his words, kina b'maisa b'reishis, the sense of jealousy or inequality or negative competitiveness in the work of God's creation. That is the key. Equality in the sense that our greatest privilege is to be here for each other, never to take advantage of another person. On the contrary, if I have a resource, if I have a gift, if I have wisdom, money, talent, creativity, humor, authenticity, it behooves me to realize these are gifts that were given to me by my Creator in order to enhance the lives of the people around me and the world around me. That is my obligation. A gift and a talent, a power, a faculty is a privilege. I don't own it. It's a gift. We don't help ourselves or each other by reducing all of humanity to the lowest possible common denominator. Of course, there are differences between people. And you know what? Use your powerful faculties that I don't have to elevate my life. And I can use the resources I have to elevate and inspire your life.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have to interrupt because we're getting a lot of texts. And again, I'm going to combine two questions. And I'm afraid you hoisted yourself on your own petard, because this question is addressed to you. And I'm going to piggyback another pardon the expression, another question on it, the one from before. So this viewer asks directly to Rabbi Jacobson, since you've given so many examples of the leadership of women, and since we have that direction, not only your examples, but whether Devorah, the judge, whatever, we have this authority.
Esther.
This viewer asks, should we not continue in ritual the elevation and the equitization, she liked the equity part, of the role of women in ritual? And she addressed that specifically to you, but obviously, Rabbi Friedman, you'll also answer on this. And still, I think the previous question is one. The Rebbe was Torah in Derech Eretz. He lived in this world. The issue of people not knowing their genders or not feeling comfortable, we have to still address that questioner, because the question is not taking a side. The question says, what do we say? What would the Rebbe say? So first, on Rabbi Jacobson, to you, on your point and the historical point of the historical role of women in Jewish leadership, in Jewish prophecy, God counts the tears of women, and we believe that women have a higher level of prophecy. Do we proceed further along the road the Rebbe started of women in ritual? And secondly, the older question, what say we?
Gender identity.
To gender, we have to say the word, transgender demands. Let's start with Rabbi Jacobson, please.
Okay, great questions, and thank you for sharing them. So question number one.
I added the two together.
Yes. So question number one, I'm going to be very brief on both questions, even though they're quite loaded, and I think we could spend quite a few days or weeks.
A whole hour on that.
Right. So I'm gonna try to be very brief and just bring out some seminal points, and we could move on. And I would love to hear what Rabbi Friedman has to say as well. In terms of point number one, we don't worship ritual. Ritual is insignificant. I'm going to remind you one of the most important biblical scenes. Moses takes the tablets that were engraved by God and he shatters them. And one of the great biblical commentators, the Meshech Chochmah, says, how did he have the audacity to do such a thing? He could have concealed them. Why you break them? And he said he understood that the Jewish people are making an error. They are attributing divinity to objects. He said, we do not worship objects, not even physical objects like the tablets. We worship a God who is imageless, a God who is definitionless, a God who doesn't have a certain color and doesn't look a certain way. That God sometimes tells me to fast on Yom Kippur, and the same God in other circumstances tells me it's a mitzvah to eat on Yom Kippur. Sometimes it's a mitzvah to go to shul, and sometimes it's a mitzvah to be quarantined. Sometimes it's a mitzvah to go into the Holy Temple, and sometimes it's a sin to go into the Holy Temple. We don't worship going up to the Torah, getting an aliyah, wearing a kippah, putting on tefillin, being a cantor in shul, reading from a Sefer Torah. We don't worship any of these rituals. We worship God. If God tells me that for me something is holy, it becomes holy, not because it's holy, because God told me that this is my mission. If God tells me that this is not my mission, this very same act and ritual becomes valueless, inconsequential, and absolutely insignificant. Moses told the Jews, don't worship tablets. Don't worship a religion of structure. Don't worship a religion of ritual. Worship a God who you cannot predict, who you cannot compress in your image and definition of reality. Worshiping God means being a conduit, a humble conduit to what God wants from me right here, right now, which may be the opposite of what he wants from you right here and right now, or what he wanted from me yesterday, right here and right now. So
Rabbi, I have to interrupt because I have to anticipate the questioner's thinking right now. The reality is that what you say is true. We're told that the Torah itself was given on Sinai, not in Jerusalem, because we travel with it. It's in us. It's not tied to a place. It's not tied to physicality. The Rebbe understood this in the 1950s as well. Why then did he make this movement on women's equity, let's call it? And the question is simple at this point: do we go further? Because everything you said is true. We don't worship it. We didn't worship carrying the Torah. Yet the Rebbe said women can hold the Torah at a certain point. Do we go further, at least in dialogue on it?
The answer is we go further. We constantly go further, but we don't go further to a place where we are detaching ourselves from the divine blueprint of what is man's role in the world and what is woman's role in the world, because that way we will not be benefiting not woman and not man. Advance, grow deeper, connect in a profounder way, but don't deprive yourself of remaining in tune with the divine heartbeat of the cosmos and the divine marching orders to the Jewish people.
Rabbi Friedman.
I think what the Rebbe was doing was maximizing the uniqueness and the other contribution that women can make to Jewish communities and to Jewish life. He wasn't asking the women to repeat or mimic what men do. That's not empowering women. That's ignoring the fact that they're women. So if a woman can do the same that a man can do, how does that make them greater women? The Rebbe was saying that women have a type of influence on the community that men don't have. And that was not being used to its maximum. And the Rebbe was saying, the time has come. We need women's contribution because we've become too masculine. And I think that's what Rabbi Jacobson is saying. The rituals are masculine.
I don't think we're going to get to an end point, and I'm getting text now for the next portion. But let's just say that the Rebbe recognized also, the Rebbe responded with his initiatives to certain demands from women. Yes, Rabbi Friedman, you're quite right in what you were saying about maximizing the potential that they hadn't been. But it was also a response. It was a way of response to what he saw in as a man of faith in the modern world. And perhaps there is dialogue going forward. And I see I'm not going to get anything from either of you on the one of the first questions on what say we on gender identity.
Can I respond to that?
Certainly.
Okay.
And by the way, I just want to make a sense of it because we've got really great questions. Thank you all for texting in. And they're questions obviously from people who are learned people and they're identifying themselves. I won't identify your names, but some of them are known to the community. And there's so many coming in that we're going to close out this first section with these comments on gender identity, if you like. Go ahead, Rabbi Friedman. Sorry for interrupting.
Imagine a woman is a mother of children, and she comes to her therapist and says, something's wrong. I have no feelings for my children. I don't have a maternal instinct. Maybe I'm not really a mother. What would the right thing for the therapist? What would the right approach be? What should he do for this woman? Now, he can say to her, you're right. You're not a mother. You're not. Some mothers are maternal. You're not. It's a fluid thing. Or should he try to recapture the maternal feelings that a woman should have for her children? Now, there might be, I'm sure there are, women who really don't have a maternal instinct. They are the exception to the rule. And they need to be helped, and they need to be understood, and they need to be encouraged in what they can do and what their strengths are and so on. But you don't dismantle motherhood because of the exception. Women and men are fantastic. Being feminine, being masculine, these are awesome things. Yin and yang, they make the world go round. Are there people who don't have a strong masculine or feminine impulse or instinct? Probably. But that doesn't dismantle and invalidate being a man or being a woman. So if a child says, I don't know what I am, what should the parents do? Tell them that they're neither, or try to help them be what their biological condition says they are? Wouldn't that be healthier?
Let me close up this section with an upshot of this question. This question, I don't think, I know, did not mean to say that should we change or should we not try and help. This question was from someone who understands that the essence and the success of Chabad Kirov is non-judgmental, that everybody is accepted within a community. I think the point of the question was people who have a confused gender identity and want to be accepted for whatever they are, not with special status, but just accepted, go into a shul and be there. Do we have a problem with that? Would the Rebbe have a problem with that? Either of you. Short, because we got to round out this section. Rabbi Friedman, Rabbi Jacobson?
There are some technical problems.
Yes.
Like, where do we put the mechitza? So for the community, it would present a dilemma. And we need to find a solution to help those people. But it seems like the popular opinion is leaning towards dismantling all gender. So that if you say men and women, you're out of line because some are neither men nor women. We can't dismantle the law or the rule because of the exception to the rule. Nor should we ignore the exception to the rule. And that's in everything. What about a Jew who doesn't feel Jewish? Who thinks he's a non-Jew? Who converted to another religion?
Now you're heading out to territories, Rabbi Jacobson said, where we can continue that conversation for another hour, which we don't have. But
we're asking some pretty big questions here.
That's not on this point, but I'll give you the last word on that, because I just want to stick to the time schedule and get on to the next section, on which we're already getting questions on race. So, thank you.
Add something about gender identity.
Sorry?
I just want to add something about gender identity.
Of course.
Okay. I think that there are two extremes that we have, and we have to appreciate these two extremes and not fall into the trap of one or the other. In the popular conversation today, one extreme is it's all about empathy, understanding what the other person is going through, being sensitive to their experiences, to their identity, to their frustrations, to their desires, to their sexual instincts, to their pain, etc. And completely accepting them and embracing them for who they are and allowing alternative lifestyles to be celebrated as much as you celebrate any other lifestyle. Then there is the other extreme. And the other extreme, which is pretty prevalent in at least many segments of what you might call the Torah observant Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, and that is the law is the law is the law. Leviticus is Leviticus, and we're not changing the Hebrew Bible because we're living in the 21st century. Certain things are absolutely prohibited and unacceptable, and they are called abominations or whatever. That's another way of talking about this conversation. I think that the authentic Torah and Jewish approach manifested by the Rebbe, at least the way I understood it and I comprehend it, is that we should not fall into any one of these two traps. Empathy and non-judgmentalism is always important. Ethics tells us never judge another person until you have not reached their space. If I am not experiencing your struggle, if I do not experiencing what you're enduring in life, I have to always remain humble, non-judgmental, and completely empathetic to another person's life experience. That is the prerequisite for living a real life as a Jew, as a man or woman of faith, as somebody who wants to fulfill God's will in this world. On the other hand, and this is critical, I do not help a person whom I love and cherish by telling them that something that God feels is not good for them suddenly becomes good and celebrated. I will not judge you. I will be completely empathetic, but it would be cruel of me if I am a true student of Torah and the Torah is divine and God says that certain relationships, certain behaviors are not good for you, not in this world and not in the next world. I will not be compassionate towards you by saying it's not a big deal, it's fine, this is what you feel, go ahead and do it. I will empathize with your pain. There is a painful journey here, but this is a challenge that you have, and I want to be here for you with love in this challenge. I do not want to deprive you from the right choices that your Creator believes you're capable of making, even amidst an agonizing and challenging situation.
Thank you. Viewers, we're moving on to the second segment, which is on race. In 1975, on the 25th anniversary of his father-in-law's passing, the Rebbe reflected on the two critical times when American intervention saved his life. The Rebbe said at the time, and I quote, "We are confident that the American tradition of active concern for those who are oppressed on racial or other grounds will be zealously continued. To be sure," he went on, "such action by those elected to public office is not always universally popular, but do not all deeds of virtue and duty require great courage?" In light of these words, and in light of the Rebbe, among other things, a lifetime of not only compassion, but involvement in civil rights. In light of these words, in light of the Rebbe urging his community not to move out of Crown Heights in 1969 just because many African Americans are moving in, but to live as good neighbors. And later in 1991, at the time of the Crown Heights riots, saying to New York's Mayor Dinkins, who had spoken of bringing both sides together, the Rebbe corrected him and said, "Mr. Mayor, we're all on the same side." What do you think the Rebbe's teachings would compel us all to do in terms of personal responsibility? Because that's really what the Rebbe was talking about of people in elective office. Personal responsibility, personal courage amidst the tensions between state authority and the African-American community today. And we started the other section with Rabbi Friedman. Rabbi Jacobson, please start this segment.
Yeah. I would just make two very, I think, important and brief points. The Rebbe would often quote the Talmudic story. It's in Tractate Tainus, page 20. It's an incredible story. One of the greatest sages, his name was Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, met a human being who greeted him. And the rabbi looked at him and said, "Wow, you're ugly. How do you become so ugly? Are all the people in your city as repulsive as you?" And the man said, "Go to the craftsman who fashioned me and tell him, wow, you have really designed a grotesque vessel." So the sage apologized. And the man said, "I will not forgive you until you go to the craftsman who created me and tell him, how ugly is this vessel that you have formed." And when they came to the city, the rabbi went to the synagogue and he apologized in public for his lack of sensitivity. And the Rebbe would point out from this story that when you display internally or externally disdain or disregard towards another human being because of a certain reality that this person possesses, which comes from God, you're not only insulting a human being, you're insulting God himself. So the foundation of a life of Judaism and of faith and of Torah is that in every single human being, no matter his or her race, ethnic background, color of skin, or any other characteristic, physical or mental, when you're looking at a person, you are looking at a vessel that was fashioned and designed by the Creator himself, a person who is in the image of that Creator, and therefore respect to that person and absolute regard for the sacredness of hers or her life is paramount. It's absolute and it's unequivocal. In every person, there is divine inspiration. And if I am not inspired by any person I meet, it means that I am not fully in touch with the fact that they were fashioned by the divine craftsman whose imprint exists in their body, in their mind, and in their soul. This was a conviction, an idea that the Rebbe breathed, he lived with. I watched the Rebbe walk home almost every Friday night for many years. Late at night, my father, you knew my father was Mr. Conversationalist. He would not leave 770 until the last person that he could have a conversation with was gone. It turned out for me that we left shul when the Rebbe left shul when nobody else was there. And I would watch the Rebbe walk down Eastern Parkway, humbly, quietly, unassuming. The streets were empty. The way he greeted every person, Jew and non-Jew, white and black. Crown Heights is filled with African Americans, men and women from the African American community, from other communities, with such dignity, with such sensitivity, with such kindness. It was what you call real equality, authentic equality, the real deep respect towards another human being, realizing that you were created in the image of God. I think that was a fundamental teaching of Judaism that the Rebbe personified. Coupled with that, it was so important to the Rebbe that because of this, every person is capable of living up to the deepest standards of morality, and the key is education. When we look at any community and we say, you can't expect so much of them because of their suffering, or lower the standards, this is what's to be expected. That for the Rebbe was a demonstration of a very deep racism. No, every child created in the image of God deserves an education of values, learning right from wrong, and learning that they individually and collectively are capable of living life to the fullest, of living a civil, moral, spiritually fulfilling life.
Rabbi Friedman.
You quoted the Rebbe's answer to Mayor Dinkins. Mayor Dinkins said, let's bring the two sides together. The Rebbe said there are no two sides, right? There's only one side. Which of the two approaches is more realistic? Which one is more poetic?
The Rebbe.
Bringing two sides together is not very realistic. Noticing, recognizing that there's only one side, that's realistic. But what did the Rebbe mean? What does that mean, there's only one side? In what way are we one? So the popular opinion is we should all be able to get along. We should all be like one people because, after all, don't we have the same needs? Sounds like a good argument.
Yes.
The fact that we have the same needs is what tears us apart. Because we're all fighting over the same water, over the same border, over the same money. No, that's not what brings us together. What really brings us together.
You anticipate the fourth segment, and when I came across the Rebbe's writings on that, on the question of compassion without cause, the perfect explanation for doing something lishma, we'll get to that.
Yeah, I'm not going there.
But we're going there, but it's segment 4.
Yes.
But I want to pin this down.
He didn't finish the sentence. Let him finish.
Oh, I thought he did. Sorry.
No, I wasn't talking about our fourth segment. No, I'm saying that what really brings us together, that makes us one, is that God expects the same thing of all of us. That is a truly unifying thought. I cannot succeed in making the world godly unless you're becoming godly too. God needs us all to do the same thing, bring heaven down to earth. All of earth So if we all have the same mission, that is a uniting factor. That I cannot succeed unless you succeed, that's a uniting factor. That we have the same needs. No, we have the same God. We have the same mission. Although we do it differently, Jews have 613 mitzvahs. They have special priestly obligations because we are a nation of priests. But what are we doing? We're making the world into God's kind of world. Well, everybody is doing that. Everybody should be doing that. So not only do we have something in common, we are interdependent. We need each other for the job to get done. In that way, we are really one. And that is more realistic than asking people who focus on their differences to put their differences aside. Why?
Okay. Rabbis, because I've got to stick to this clock. And we have had a great number of texts on this issue. I am now going to put my editor's hat on. I'll put my lawyer's hat away. I'm going to edit the text, and I'm going to add a little remez of what I wanted to ask. So let me just formulate this question, and let me get back to the initial question, which I had posed. The question is, what personal actions do we take? And one of the texters brought up a very important point. So let me overlay that and make 3-4 texts into one question. During the civil rights movement, Rabbi Heschel marched, many rabbis marched. Rabbi Heschel and the Rebbe had a great correspondence on this, and the Rebbe was very supportive of those issues. And we know that in Berlin, the Rebbe and Rabbi Heschel and Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik were very close, and those friendships continued. One texter asked, how is it that in the 1960s, between blacks and Jews, and here I'll just open a parenthesis from me, the only peoples in liberal democracies and in Western liberal nations that by law were chattel, how is it, this question was, that in the 1960s, we put aside who suffered more, and we can't be there today together? What has broken down, and is there anything, not that we should do, but what would the Rebbe suggest that we do in terms of all this are true, what you said, but how do we talk and get the other side to understand what was implicitly understood during the civil rights movement? Either of you. And there won't be any other questions for this section after that. How do we get from where we are? How did we get so far away from then without talking about blame? But how do we get back to there? How do we get back to that common understanding that the Rebbe was talking about? Personal responsibility. It's not enough to talk about our philosophy. The Lubavitch Chabad succeeds because, if I may, it's the palmach of the Jewish people. How do we get back there? How do we get back to a communality of understanding of, if not equal suffering, equitable suffering, or as you, Rabbi Jacobson, said, empathy? It's not a matter of who goes first. It's not a matter of whether it should be the Jews or the African American community. The question from the listener, from the viewer, was, how did we get so far away from where we were?
Well, I'm not a sociologist, so I can't answer your question of why. But I would like to address an even more important question. What is our duty today? What is our moral obligation today?
That's exactly the question.
And I think the authentic response is, we were chosen to be moral teachers of mankind, not because of smugness and arrogance, because that is our divine mission, to empower mankind, to elevate it, to sublimate it, to inspire it, to teach the world what we learned at Sinai. And I think today there's a historic opportunity for Jewish people from all persuasions, backgrounds, walks of life, from the United States of America, Canada, and many other countries, to reach out to the African American, to our Black brothers and sisters, and say, listen, you have suffered terribly. The institution of slavery was not just cruel and painful, But the savage suffering, the destruction of culture, values, family, the basic relationships between parents and children that slaves endured in the United States and in other countries is horrific. We, the Jewish people, sadly know a thing or two about suffering. Let's be here together. We're all God's children. As the Rebbe said, it's not two sides, we're one side. The worst things we could have done for ourselves, the Jewish people, is to become victims for eternity and to say, the Germans are guilty, the Nazis are guilty, Stalin is guilty, Lenin is guilty, Arafat is guilty, this one is guilty. Yes, we have to stand up to bigotry, hatred, racism, anti-Semitism. But the narrative that defines a people is that we are capable of changing the world, that we're capable of inspiring and empowering people to become divine ambassadors of love, light, hope, healing, wisdom, authenticity, redemption. Our Black brothers and sisters, this is a time to rise to the occasion and realize that your inner sacred divine dignity could never be destroyed. Empower your youth to become people who are ambassadors of love, of kindness, of morality, together with the empathy of past or present suffering and racism. I think this is our extraordinary moral obligation as Jews to use our influence in this direction. And I believe we can accomplish a lot because this conversation is missing from the conversation today in America and other countries about race relations.
Which is why I pushed the point. Rabbi Friedman?
I just want to make this one clarification. Suffering does not make the world go round. Life is not about suffering, and it's not about not suffering. I wouldn't want the Jewish people to be known as those who suffered. That's not who we are. So we suffered. Thank God it's over. But that's who we are. Based on that, I'm going to design my life to protect myself from never suffering again. That's a miserable life. We can't define life by suffering. Nobody wants to be known that way. Nobody wants to be known as the people who suffered. It's not dignified, it's not complimentary, and it's not who we are. So, yes, we need to reach out and teach and educate morality, godly morality, but not particularly to those who suffer the most, to every human being, because nobody lives their life based on suffering.
Thank you,
We live our life based on meaning. And if we don't know the meaning of our lives, then even if no one else causes us to suffer, we will suffer internally.
Thank you, Rabbi. The third theme for this dialogue is destiny. In 1951, in his first talk upon assuming the leadership of the Lubavitch movement, the Rebbe made a dramatic challenge to people, to all people of faith, as a statement. He said, faith demands that everyone must do good on their own and not depend on his Rebbe. Don't deceive yourselves, he told his community, in thinking that I will lead you. And you will engage only in singing songs and toasting, and that will be enough. Each of you must carry your own load, do your own battle. I do not decline from helping, but nothing, even heaven, can replace personal responsibility. And he said this just before the war. Great writer George Bernard Shaw said something similar where he said liberty, and he was warning about Hitler, and he was warning the British people about Hitler, and he said liberty demands responsibility. That's why so many dread it. To both of you, have people today taken up the Rebbe's almost revolutionary challenge of personal responsibility, or do most still dread it and prefer to live in quiet, self-contained communities far removed from the modern challenges? Where do we go in modern destiny? Are we to be part of history, or are we withdrawing back? To either of you, Rabbi Friedman. Personal
responsibility, absolutely. Anybody, in all of history understood personal responsibility, or they never got anywhere and never amounted to anything. The Rebbe took it a step higher. We are not only personally responsible, we are partners with God in creation, which means God depends on us to be an active partner in making the world what it's meant to be. So it's not only personal responsibility because of the dignity of the human being, independence, freedom of choice. On the contrary, freedom of choice is not a compliment at all when we have a much bigger responsibility and a much bigger role. We are partners with God, and therefore we have to do our half, our share. Otherwise, we frustrate the entire plan of creation. So it's not just human dignity, it's cosmic. If we don't do our half, God's plan is frustrated. So it's bigger than just everybody's got to do their share.
Let me just broaden the question a bit for Rabbi Jacobson. What I was driving at here, has the community, have all people become too dependent? Hasidim on their Rebbes, lay people on their political representatives, taking everything at face value, taking orders without questioning and without intellectual rigor and without challenge. That was the point of my last question. Are we becoming, all people? So, to go back to what Rabbi Friedman said, a life lived with a mentality of suffering is not much of a life at all. Have humanity, particularly in the Western world, have we become so pummeled into submission of fear that we will grasp at any direction from anyone without that personal responsibility? Doesn't mean marching in the streets. It means taking responsibility in your life without having to have an answer and a dictate on every aspect. Have we become a weaker generation, Rabbi Jacobson? Arim and Arim. We're not just talking about Chabad here. We're talking about the Rebbe's words for mankind, for our society today.
It's a great question. So, they still often quote Karl Marx that religion is an opium for the masses. And I think if you study religious philosophy over the last few thousand years, you will see that humility is always considered a very vital virtue. Of course, Moses is described in the Bible as the humblest human being walking the face of the earth in the book of Numbers. We just read it 2 weeks ago. But how do you describe humility? What is humility? And I think in religious philosophy, you will see two streams. One stream that is still embraced by many people is humility really means that you should realize that you're a shmata. You are futile. Not futile, but as we say, you've come from earth, you're going to go back to the earth. Many of your dreams are futile, you're frail, you're weak, you're mortal, you're completely dependent. And just be humble, because realize how small you are in the big picture. That's one perspective. For the Rebbe, humility meant the exact opposite. And it's hard even to describe in words how for the Rebbe, humility actually meant the exact opposite. Humility meant that you realized that at every moment, you are an ambassador of God. You are a conduit for the divine, and therefore you have infinite power. You are invincible. You are indestructible. Your abilities are extraordinary. You know why? Not because you're so great, but because you are a manifestation of God in this world. The more humble you are, the more powerful, creative, revolutionary you become, because you see yourself as a shliach, as a messenger of Hashem, and therefore your vision, your dreams remain unstoppable, and you know that you can overcome adversity. You can turn every challenge into an opportunity, and you can take every obstacle and literally allow it to turn you into the most powerful, divine, and great person and impact countless lives. There were few things that bothered the Rebbe as much as when he saw people forfeiting the opportunity of recognizing how much infinite potential, how much beauty, how much godliness, how much resilience and strength, fortitude and prowess lay embedded in their soul. It was once Purim. The Rebbe said, what's the lesson of the Persian foolish Achashverosh king who throws a party for 187 days? Do we really have to know about this glutton, this drunk named Achashverosh? And the Rebbe, in his inimitable style, said, yes, the Torah is trying to teach you a lesson. If a foolish alcoholic, a Persian tyrant Achashverosh, understood that if you have the resources, you got to throw a party for 187 days straight, how much more so should we, God's people, understand that every talent and resource that we have in our life and in our psyche, we have to maximize to change the world.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. We're going to go to the last segment, and I want to leave enough time for both of you to have your closing remarks. The Rebbe defined Judaism in a marvelous way. Judaism is about doing, he said, not just knowing, and about living life with compassion without cause. I've never, in any philosophy, religious or otherwise, there's never been a better definition for doing something lishma. Rabbi Friedman talked about, certainly you have too, Rabbi Jacobson, about people having to understand the power of their kindness and of their goodness. And lishma translates into for the sake of it. It doesn't resonate with people. And words do matter. And compassion without cause should be described everywhere. So he once said, Rabbi Chaim Miller, in his words, said the Rebbe wanted to turn Judaism outward. And in this regard, the Rebbe was fearless. His courage, you could say, was the engine that drove the astounding success of the Shlichus movement. He had no fear that contact with non-observant Jews or with non-Jews would in any way diminish the commitment of his emissaries. And we've seen that today from Rabbi Levin and all the others here in Chabad, Quebec. On the contrary, he believed that involvement with all communities strengthened the compassion and understanding that are the foundations of social justice. He had opposition to this view from within. And it's telling that in the exact same years as the Rebbe was building this philosophy of turning Judaism outward, Reverend King was fighting against those in his movement who wanted to be black segregations. They didn't want dialogue, they wanted confrontation. And on this, the Rebbe wrote, intolerance lies at the heart of evil, not the intolerance that results from any threat or danger, but intolerance of another being who dares to exist. To your point, Rabbi Jacobson, that you made, intolerance without cause. It is so deep within us because every human being secretly desires the entire universe to himself. Our only way out is to learn compassion without cause, to care for each other simply because that other exists. Rabbi Friedman, Rabbi Jacobson, you can incorporate your answers into your closing remarks or set this apart. But I think we're at a crossroads in society. We're at a crossroads in the world. Is mankind drifting not only further away from the possibility of compassion without cause, but again, not even having the courage or the historical terms of reference, out of fear, out of mediocrity, I just want, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau had a wonderful vort here in Montreal when he said the problem with our people today, we are falling in love with karka. And he said that very simple word meaning land in a very derogatory way. Have we enough, not just koiches within individuals, have we enough individuals with that koiches to stay true to compassion without cause, which brings everything else the Rebbe tried to teach, which makes everything else the Rebbe tried to achieve possible. Rabbi Friedman, Rabbi Jacobson, the floor is yours. Indicate who wants to go first.
I think that behind everything the Rebbe said and did was a revolutionary idea. Really revolutionary, no hype.
And optimistic.
And optimistic. And what the revolution was is that for all of history, Literally from the beginning of history, everything human beings accomplished, everything human beings did, was driven by need. You have to. You have to plow, you have to put in the seeds, you have to, otherwise you'll die. Need is the mother of all invention. That's what drove all of history. Everything we ever accomplished is because we needed. Religion, until the Rebbe, reinforced that idea. You are, like Rabbi Jacobson said, you are frail, you are helpless, you are dependent, you are needy. You have to win God's favor that maybe he'll help you out, because on your own, you're lost. And that's what drove all of civilization, need. The Rebbe introduced this revolutionary idea. We are not needy. We're not needy at all. Now, behind all selfishness is the feeling that I need. If I need, then your existence threatens me, because you're going to compete with me for my needs. You're going to deny me my needs. Even Cain and Abel couldn't share the planet because they were needy. The Rebbe says we're not needy. We are guests in God's world. Why would we be needy? On the contrary, the Creator needs our service. Only a creator can be needy. Nobody creates a universe for nothing. We are not needy. We are needed. See, the whole idea that the Rebbe sends young couples out, like you say, in non-Jewish environments, non-frum environments, and so on. What's the problem? You need support. You need encouragement. You are needed to fulfill a mission, and that is far more powerful and far more interesting and far more inspiring and optimistic, because I'm not acting out of my need. I'm not the victim. I'm not needy. I'm not on my knees all the time. On the contrary, I represent a magnificent, vast, eternal plan that depends on me. And he turned it upside down completely. Human beings are too needy. Like you were saying, are we too mindless? Are we just following the crowd? Are we just giving in? We're acting on our needs, and it's not working anymore. Because even young children are saying, I need to clean up my room? I didn't even ask to be born. Don't burden me. I'm a guest here. And they're right. So we need to know what we are needed for, because otherwise we will just continue to be needy, and we will fight for our needs, and we will be intolerant of anybody else who has needs, because that's competition. So we are coming into a whole new reality.
Rabbi Friedman,
introduced.
I'm going to exploit your words, and again, I apologize to both of you because the time is ticking, and the questions are great, but I'm going to exploit your words because it leads exactly. And Rabbi Jacobson, I'm going to act as the moderator. You're going to have to answer this and add whatever else you want. It's a question from a very good friend of Chabad Quebec and of Chabad Montreal, and just on your question of need, and he texted this in as you were speaking. So the Rebbe's words on intolerance had to do with almost jealousy, that people have to end this jealousy of not liking the other because they exist. And as Rabbi Friedman said, because they have needs, but I have needs, and I'm not going to let him get what I want. So this text has asked the following. Are some of the current tensions between African Americans and white America, between African Americans and Jewish Americans, are they greater at the lower end of the economic scale, the income inequality question, and less at the higher? And is equality, and here I'll use equity, equality in economic affairs, part of what the Rebbe was talking about when he talked about respecting the other and not hating the other just because he exists. And therefore, as Rabbi Friedman said, he's going to have his needs, and you're afraid that your needs, my needs, are going to be forgotten.
My turn, or his?
Your turn. I preface that by saying I'm going to exploit Rabbi Friedman's phrase because the text just came in as he was using it. They're even calling in now from Toronto. They forgot. Viewers, please text your questions. 514-993-3429.
No. He's calling to tell you that he loves you.
It's a her. Rabbi Jacobson, please.
He's calling.
I have no idea. Rabbi Jacobson?
Yes. I was gratified to read an article a few days ago by Cynthia Ozick, famous writer in the Wall Street Journal, entitled "The Anti-Semitism of the Intellectuals." And she makes a very powerful case, which I think many of us knew before, but she documents it, how people should not err that the anti-Semitism comes from what we call people who grew up without an education, without an understanding of history, of the history of racism, knowing about Holocaust, genocides, massacres, pogroms, slavery. She shows how the more dangerous anti-Semitism comes from thinkers, academics, essayists, novelists, professors, politicians, people with doctorates, well-educated, who nonetheless harbor within their hearts and minds hatred, animosity towards the Jewish people and others. She says that is the danger, because it's the intellectual anti-Semitism that fuels the more external anti-Semitism that is played out by bigots and terrorists or potential terrorists. So I think this is a very authentic danger that Cynthia Ozick points out on one side of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum, physics is searching for the string theory. We're searching for that singular mathematical equation that can explain the entire cosmos. We call it the string theory because of the theory that it's really like a musical vibration on the string of a violin or another musical instrument. And I would say, if you're looking for the common denominator in 90 years of the Rebbe's writings, teachings, essays, letters, talks, addresses, it's articulating the string theory of Judaism, seeing all of Judaism as ultimately demonstrating and embodying and living, manifesting the divine harmony and oneness that pervades cosmology, philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, biology, medicine, psychology, theology, Jewish law, current events, because the world is ultimately one. Hashem Echad. Mashiach's coming means that we will all live that oneness. And the Rebbe really felt that after thousands of years of terrible violence, humanity is now ready for that transformation of consciousness in which we are ready to recognize our innate oneness and live it in our daily lives. So yes, there is looting, there is violence, there is still bloodshed. Sadly, there's a lot of anti-Semitism. But I think from the Rebbe's perspective, this is the world spitting out the last remnants of evil so that we should be able to identify the good from the evil, but humanity as a whole is marching towards the march of oneness and redemption. And I say to you, my dearest brothers and sisters, these are historic times. Don't forfeit the opportunity. Each and every one of us can be an unbelievable and powerful ambassador today of this type of love and morality and oneness. If there's time, I would love to share a story, but I don't know if there's time. If there's time, you'll tell me.
I just got a message from Rabbi New, and there is time. We can go over if you have time. We also received a very moving
story.
We
I
also,
was a story that happened when I was a child
please.
in the early 1980s. There was an old man, I'm sure Rabbi Friedman remembers him. His name was Zalman Teibel. Zalman Teibel introduced a song into Chabad culture that they sing when you take out the Torah. Ano, avda the kutsha berichu. Ano, avda, I am the servant of the divine. A very beautiful melody. He introduced us in the 1960s. Years passed, decades passed. He was already a man in his high 80s or 90s. And sadly, he suffered from dementia or Alzheimer's. He was senile. He didn't have immediate family. He didn't have a spouse or children. They put him in a senior citizen home in Williamsburg in Brooklyn called Eshel Avraham. And one year they brought him right before Yom Kippur to get honey cake and a blessing from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. For the new year, the Rebbe would distribute honey cake, lekach, right before Yom Kippur, the eve of Yom Kippur in the afternoon. He comes to the Rebbe's room where the Rebbe was giving honey cake. The line extended for blocks down Eastern Parkway, up Brooklyn Avenue. Thousands of people were waiting online to get the honey cake from the Rebbe, literally an hour or two before Yom Kippur would descend upon the horizon. And he approaches the Rebbe. He came in a wheelchair. People were holding him, his assistants from the old age home. But sadly, he was senile, and he didn't recognize the Rebbe. He was there, but he was out of it. And the Rebbe looked at him and started to wave the cake because they had a very close relationship. Reb Zalman Teibel was a devoted chassid and disciple of the Rebbe. And now the Rebbe saw him after a few years of being in a senior citizen home, and he was completely out of it. It was a painful moment, and the Rebbe wanted to connect to him consciously, but he couldn't. And the line was going very, very fast, and Zalman Teibel was just out of it. And the Rebbe suddenly, unexpected, in front of the door of his room, started to sing a song, solo. The Rebbe sang the song that Zalman Teibel brought to Chabad decades earlier in the 60s. The Rebbe started to sing. The Rebbe had a beautiful, beautiful voice. Anybody who heard the Rebbe sing, your heart could melt. He was an extraordinary warmth and passion in his singing, and very subtle, very subtle. And the Rebbe starts, Ano, avda the kutsha berichu. The secretaries of the Rebbe were startled. It's right before Yom Kippur. Thousands of people are waiting. The whole line stopped. And the Rebbe is singing, Ano, avda the kutsha berichu. In the middle of the song, Reb Zalman Teibel came back. His consciousness, the melody triggered something very deep in him. And he suddenly became aware. And he looks and he sees the Rebbe. He's in front of the Rebbe. And he broke out in such a smile because it was like the happiest thing he could have imagined. And he's standing literally in front of his beloved Rebbe. And he was smiling. He was so happy and so joyous. And the Rebbe saw this. And the Rebbe gave him a piece of cake, gave him a beautiful, beautiful, warm and loving blessing. And Reb Zalman Teibel moved on. They took him back to the home of senior citizens. And the line continued. And for me, this was such an incredible and powerful lesson, how the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was a world and global leader and spoke about a vision of changing the world, transforming civilization, uniting the entire Jewish people and all of humanity as we discussed tonight. Nonetheless, for him, this global vision always came down in a very concrete way. One old senile man in his 90s in an old age home comes for a piece of honey cake right before Yom Kippur, and the Rebbe stops a line of thousands of people and sings a song, sharing a moment of intimacy with this person to be able to connect with his soul and give him the dignity, the love, and the connection that he so yearned for. All of us can learn from that.
Rabbis, we have more questions. They're very much variations on the theme. But the Rebbe taught, if you want to see God, you want to feel God, go to where there is suffering. And I just got a text of a question a few minutes ago. Has nothing whatever to do with equality or race or destiny. It's about a woman suffering. And she wants a simple answer. And I'm going to read the question because you tell your stories of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would also have time to see two black boys, black boys playing near 770. And they would sometimes, and he would come over to them and say, your brothers, don't fight. And he would give them dollars now and then and tell them to buy something. One of the young boys grew up to be the council in Crown Heights, James E. Davis, who was later killed. And his brother to this day remembers we were 10, 11, 12, and there was this man who now we know, as his brother said, is the Grand Rebbe. But then we just saw he was a nice older man who cared about two young people.